Let's talk about this. Nebraska head coach Matt Rhule questions Big Ten non-conference scheduling. Nebraska head coach Matt Rhule is sounding off on non-conference scheduling in the Big Ten. Rhule made the comment while talking to former Ohio State Buckeye head coach Urban Meyer on the Triple Option podcast. The Husker head coach was asked about the recent headlines following Nebraska's decision to cancel an upcoming home series with the Tennessee Volunteers, whose athletic director is a good buddy of ours. All right, Rhule made it clear that with the Big Ten already scheduling 9 conference games, there's little incentive to load up on your non-conference schedule. And I quote, "Why would you ever play one of those games? I'm going to be completely honest, Coach Meyer. I'm at a lucky point in my life in my 4th job, and after getting fired in the NFL, I kind of say what I feel nowadays." That is true. Rhule's a very honest guy. All right, I could care less. That's Rhule, not me. Why in the world would a Big Ten team that's always playing 9 conference games, why would you ever play one of those games? End quote. Here's another one. They proved to us this year, when they did all the seeding and all that stuff, that early season wins didn't mean a thing. That really, it was at the end of the day what you look like in the last month of the season. That's what it's all proved to us. And when I say it looks like it's really good, it's about your offense. If you're scoring points and blowing people out late in the year, you're going to make the playoffs. End quote. I've heard him say this a couple times. He said it to me one time on the phone. Like, it was right after the SEC title game. He goes, it was defense that won this game. But offense is what everyone wants to look at. So, as a college football fan, hate everything about this. Hate it. I want to see big-time matchups. I want to see the best teams play the best. As a Nebraska football fan, let me ask you a question, Jake. Let's say, take Nebraska out of it. Let's say Team A, Team B. Let's say Team A and Team B play relatively the same schedule. They're in the Big Ten. Team A plays Ohio State, Oregon, and those are their 2 big games. They finish the season 10-2. Okay. Beat everybody else. And they're in a college football playoff. They're going head-to-head to try to get that last seed, that 12th seed, that 11th seed, whatever the case may be. Team B plays Ohio State, Oregon. They're in the Big Ten. They don't play each other, so you don't have a head-to-head because every conference has 92,000 teams for some reason, money. So you don't get the head-to-head tiebreaker. Their strength of schedules are relatively the same, but the difference is Team B also played Texas in the non-conference, and now they're 9-3. Who's getting in? Who would get in? The 10-2 team with a now weaker strength of schedule, or the 9-3 team with a considerably much tougher extra opponent and additionally a tougher strength of schedule? Who's getting in?
Probably the 10-2 team.
Not probably, Jake. They're getting in. So I've got this thing in front of me. I'm not going to go through it. Dabo Swinney basically talks about how he couldn't care less what the college football playoff does. We're just going to go out and win. We've been in 7 of the last 10 playoffs. Okay, by the way, Clemson has the most amount of returning production of any team in the entire country this year. They're the favorite to win the ACC. After this year, if he doesn't fix things, and he's one of the best coaches in America, talking about Swinney, they're going to fall off a cliff. And I can dive more into that later in this season. If you're going to recruit outside the top 25 and you're not going to use the transfer portal, you're going to fall off a cliff. And this is about their 3rd year in a row of doing it, but this is not a Clemson show. I'll come back to that. Greg Sankey points blame at College Football Playoff Committee over Nebraska, Wake Forest, canceling series with Tennessee and Ole Miss. Isn't it pretty much the SEC and Big Ten that are running college football? Am I wrong on that, Jake?
Oh, no, that's right.
Huh. Does Greg own a mirror? Do you think he owns a mirror? Do you think he cares?
They just will not listen to the 9 conference games thing. They just can't accept it.
It's the same. So I guarantee if the Big Ten were playing 8 conference games, it'd make much more sense to play a one tough non-conference schedule. But they're playing 9. You look at the ACC and SEC have never once been punished for playing 8. So they play Timbuktu U right before their big rivalry games at the end of the year. So you get 2 bye weeks, then they get this 3rd bye week. They're not punished for it. The Big Ten teams are like, why are we playing an extra non-conference game that's tough? Fans are like, this sucks. And Adam Carriker's like, you're right. And then I'm like, but if I'm in Matt Rhule's shoes, I'd probably do the same thing. I would. I don't like it. I don't love it. I hate it, and I don't want any more of it. The weirdest things have come out of my mouth today, Jake. But I'm telling you, it's what I would probably do. Now, there are some schools out there, I'm convinced somebody in the scheduling department hates these schools. So Florida, I talked about this briefly. Their schedule last year was not ASA 7, ASA 8, it was ASA 9. It might be worse this year. So they are one of the top 15 most talented teams in the country. Look at talent composite rankings. They have the 11th best odds of winning the national title. Yet the over-under for their win-loss total this year is 6.5 games. And here's why. They play LSU because they play 8 of the top 21 teams. that are favored to win the national title. So the top 21 teams in America that have the best odds of winning a national title, they play 8 of them. Think about that. Our schedule looks like Cupcake City now. We're like Bakery U at Nebraska compared to what Florida's going to do, and Oklahoma might be worse in the SEC. Florida kind of did it to themselves a little bit out of conference. They got LSU, Miami, Texas, Texas A&M, Georgia, Ole Miss, Tennessee, and who knows what to make of Florida State, but they might be good. Florida State. Those 8 teams. Now you can point to Long Island and South Florida. That's one of the better G5 teams, plus an in-state rival. That's one of their 4 easy games. Then you got Mississippi State, who's an SEC team, so you never know. I mean, I'm not a Florida guy here, but their schedule looks crazy to me. And then you look at Oklahoma, their SEC schedule. So I will say this. Florida did it a little bit to themselves. They always play Florida State, an ACC team every year. But then they threw in Miami, and then they threw in South Florida. I'm kind of like, you a little bit did that to yourself. You look at Oklahoma's conference schedule. They also, just for good measure, play Michigan in the non-conference. But in conference, all right, Texas, South Carolina, Ole Miss, Tennessee, Alabama, Missouri, LSU. That's in conference. Those teams are all going to be top 20 teams next year. And by the way, Ole Miss has won the 3rd most amount of games of any team in the entire SEC. Georgia, Texas, Ole Miss. Don't sleep on Ole Miss. How can you with Lane Kiffin talking all the time? But you get my point. Like those 2 schedules, I'm kind of like, holy smokes. But then you look at Ohio State. The team has just won the national title. Their non-conference, Akron, Western Michigan, Marshall. With all due respect. What? I can say anything I want after all due respect, right?
I think so. Yeah.
With all due respect, what? Now, they actually had some teams they played in conference. Remember back to Oregon? Remember back to Penn State? Indiana, a top 10 playoff team? Excuse me. And of course, we all remember that wonderful Michigan game that Ohio State fans want to forget. But Michigan didn't turn out to be as bad as we thought at the end of the year. Then you look at Penn State. You remember Penn State, who lost to Ohio State, actually was seated higher than Ohio State? Do you remember that, Jake?
Yeah.
Look at their schedule. Bowling Green, Kent. Then you look at I guess they did play West Virginia. I think West Virginia was 6-6 in their bowl game. I could be wrong, maybe 7-5. But you look at their conference schedule. I mean, they've got like UCLA, USC, Wisconsin, Washington, Minnesota. I mean, it was Ohio State. So Ohio State played Penn State, Oregon, Indiana, Washington, won 3 of those 4 games, and beat Penn State head-to-head, but because they had 2 losses, they were seated behind Penn State, who lost on their home field to Ohio State. But because Penn State had a softer, shall we say, Big Ten slate, even after playing Oregon in the Big Ten title game, which, as we all know, is not part of your regular season schedule, they had the same amount of losses, lost to Ohio State, but still, because they didn't want to punish them for losing the Big Ten title game, because they want to pretend that these conference championship games still matter, so we'll go along with the facade for now. Actually were seated ahead of Ohio State. I believe Penn State was, 6? I know Ohio State was 8 because Tennessee was 9 in that first round game. I don't know. Like, it's the way college football is set up, which is what annoys me about what Greg Sankey said. No, dude. The Big Ten and SEC are driving this. And if you don't like the way it is, then change what you're doing, because you pretty much tried to take over college football with a stronghold because you can. It's business. I get it. But just don't deflect blame elsewhere. Just hold the mirror up in the right direction, please. I don't know, Jake. What are your thoughts? I hear the music, but what are your thoughts before we get out of here?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. And the whole Tennessee canceling series thing, I mean, it's frustrating at first. But, you know, the more Matt Rhule goes out and talks about it, the more it makes sense. And I continue to say, if we're going to play, you have these big conferences, I'd say just play a 12-game conference schedule and then figure it out in the playoffs.